welcome all of you. I think we have close to 500 people attending, and if there are any questions on the right hand side, please send us the questions, and we'll try to take them with the different panelists during the session. I think quickly, let me just start with you, and we have spent a lot of time, I think, on many of these sort of special situation kind of deals. At one point in time, we used to say special situations were really in real estate, and I think both Dave and you are having a real estate background. And I think Srini, your quote always stays with me, which says that you said that all land banks have become bank lands. So today, I think from that perspective, um, I think there's opportunity all across. Everything seems special only. So where do you see the special opportunities in the otherwise so-called special situations?
Uh, Thank you for reminding me of that. I had forgotten that, but well, we are in obviously extremely uncharted territory right now, and you can. I'm an eternal optimist. And you can look at the situation as glass half full or half empty. I think market dislocation because of COVID and the fact that we already had uh, let's say a buildup of stressed loans in the system, which looked like there might be some light at the end of the tunnel, has really got punctured in because of now COVID coming in, and nature of stress is going to be different. So you're likely to see two different buckets of stress. Those companies which were already teetering and who already were on the verge of default or already defaulted, and we are at various stages of resolution either through IBC or outside IBC. That's one bucket. The other bucket that is now getting created is on account of practically no economic activity in the country. Many other companies are going to find it very, very challenging and are going to require capital. Now, these companies may not be, stressed from the perspective of, let's say, default and debt, etc., because there will be some forbearance from the banks. But they would certainly require additional capital, whether that capital is debt, equity, or a combination of the two. The reality of it is that this slowdown is going to essentially, if you knock off, our monthly GDP, which essentially is gone for the last 2 months, that entire loss that we are going to have as an economy has to wash through the books of companies and individuals, and that means that that gap has to get funded from somewhere, and whether that gap is funded as debt or equity is immaterial, because as far as special situation funds are concerned, that's exactly what they're meant for. uh, we step in where that gap is available. We step in where conventional sources of capital cannot address the needs of the market, and therefore shorter term lower hanging fruit opportunity are likely to be stuff which is going to come out of the fallout of the COVID. If sort of that answers the question. The other silver lining, going back to the quote, is that since land banks have become bank lands, and it looks like the supply chain of the world are going to be re-engineered. I do hope that many of these banks, and you and I know some of these banks which have swapped their loans for thousands of acres of land, they should simply take those thousands of acres of land and work with whoever is the development authority to create industrial manufacturing zones and have special incentives to move the supply chain manufacturing from China to India.
Yeah. So, Dave, let me just come to that. And, I think I'm fortunate enough to have two people who are known for their punchlines. One is Srini and another one is you. So, Srini talked about, take the poorest of the people, find the best opportunities and capitalize and monetize on them. I remember you telling me in one point in time that when I asked, for everyone on the call today, that what is a secret success? How do you ensure you become successful? And Dave's answer to me was, let's apply the PhD formula. And I said, what is a PhD formula? Do you only hire PhDs, or do you only bet on companies which are certified PhDs? And he said, no, PhD stands for passionate, hardworking, and desperate. So if you actually find those kind of targets, your investment will be very successful. So now Srini has talked about the passion and the desperation in the market. Where do you see your opportunities? Which are your sort of PhD candidates to invest? Where is Brookfield looking at? You're obviously the largest guys in the market. Oaktree, fund, which is 51% owned by Brookfield, invested, as I heard, just about $15 billion for what we call as post-COVID situations. So I think we'll all be very keen to hear, what are the pockets in which you are keen to invest?
So the way we are looking at this from a Brookfield perspective, a lot of people are comparing what's happening right now to the 0809 meltdown. And we think this is actually very different because what happened in the GFC was more of a financial crisis, right? It was a large part of it was coming out of banks and financial institutions, and it sort of rubbed off on certain sectors. What's happening now in India and pretty much across the world is a real impact on the real economy, on manufacturing, on consumption, on jobs. So this is a very different situation, and we are in, like Srini said, unprecedented times a little bit. Fortunately for us, I think we raised a lot of large funds last year, including what I invest out of, which is our special opportunities fund. So we're sitting on a lot of dry powder. And the commitment to India remains because we think the fundamentals of India remain strong. We are long-term investors, so whatever happens in the short term coming out of this, which is a little bit of crystal ball grazing for everybody, I think the long-run commitment to India remains. I think what will change though as we come out of this for us, as we look at opportunities, and we even now continue to actively look at a lot of transactions, is that businesses and the environment has just changed. Maybe permanently, but for sure in the medium term. So the underwritings completely changed. The understanding of the sectors have completely changed. And I think one of the things we are very, very cautious about is liquidity in the market is really, really difficult in spite of, funnily enough, banks being flushed with funds. The money is not really flowing into businesses. So we are seeing sectors and companies which, even though the businesses are actually very strong fundamentally, might still run into a lot of crisis simply because of lack of liquidity, especially if you're a capital goods player or a contractor or anything linked to real assets. Anything which is capital intensive, given the liquidity environment, is going to be very tough. So we see lots of opportunities on the special sit side. So a lot of large corporate groups are looking for financing at a holdco level where they've got diversified businesses and we have different issues of liquidity problems across businesses, and you need a solution for an overall group level. We're seeing a lot of margin financing solution required not necessarily for the NBFC kind of lending, which is lend against shares, but for somebody genuinely looking to come up with a solution where company shares are just mortgaged, and now given the free fall of what's coming around, you need financing. We're seeing a lot of opportunities in acquisition financing. A lot of NBFC portfolios are up for sale, both corporate and real estate. So I think what Roshan and I was speaking about earlier, pretty much everything in the market is special right now. So special opportunities pretty much prevalent, but you really have to be cautious coming out of this on you get into, because the next 6 to 9 months are very, very difficult to predict how we come out of this.
Got it. Yeah. So promoter financing, capital intensive industries, and other special pockets. I think coming to that, I think Srini and Dave, maybe if I can ask this both to you. So Srini, particularly to you, I think there are opportunities, as you said, sort of pre-IBC, which are in some cases stressed, but not really so stressed because they're having some arrangements with the banks or relationships, but they still need financing. And second is obviously the ones which are sort of already going down the bus, and which have already become substandard. And when the IBC opens up, they will probably become substandard. So between the standard and the substandard debt, where do you see a bigger pool of interest?
Sorry, I missed your question. Where do you see what?
Between the standard debt and the substandard debt, I mean, let's put it the other way, your ARC bucket versus your AIF bucket, until such time as allow AIFs to invest in ARC. I think, uh, between NPAs versus non-NPAs, where do you see that you will be able to make better returns? And second, which pocket do you think is more interested from a sell side perspective?
Well, if the account is already an NPA and if it's an older NPA, the chances are that given the fact that we are almost into the second year of recognition of NPAs, those NPAs will be written down in the books of banks. And consequently, it makes it a more palatable conversation for the lenders to accept a haircut on the value because the haircut is already in the provided numbers. And therefore, whether that after the haircut the particular investment will make sense or not is a different matter, but it at least makes the conversation that much more easier. Whereas those which are recently stressed, SMA1, SMA2, those kind of accounts, banks will just not be willing to take a haircut on the loans, and they tend to be more refinancing, one-time settlement kind of situations with nominal this thing of the loans by the borrower. What we have, from our perspective, prioritized is that we are frankly quite disappointed with the pace and outcome and the manner in which the IBC has actually played out so far. And therefore, we feel that transaction certainty is greater if we were to do a transaction prior to the IBC, whether it is SMA or NPA, doesn't matter. The challenge doing a transaction prior to the IBC has always been to get the consensus amongst the lenders. In the one transaction that we had done, which was actually a company which had gone through CDR, just to get the entire lending consortium in the CDR in one page, to really take back the full amount of money that they were getting, and consequently give us the NOC and various other paperwork, was a 6-month task. So I think where we are really missing out as a country is that somewhere the incentives are not adequately aligned in the lenders' minds to move quickly where they see an opportunity to get a good outcome for their underlying investment. If somebody is willing to pay you the full amount outstanding and take the company out of the CDR, I would reckon that as management, the bankers would have put that as the high priority item to get that settled. To give you an example, in that particular instance, the banks had actually written down the loan, so they were actually getting the full value of the loan back. So in their books, it was resulting in a profit, and they could have easily booked that profit in the December quarter, but they just couldn't get their act together. So it finally came down to March. So it's a question of being able to move quickly. Imagine if instead of March, and we closed the deal in first week of February, had they been late by 6 weeks, COVID would have hit, and we would have pulled the deal away, and the banks would have got nothing, and the company would have gone into further trouble. So getting their act together and the lender is critical from our perspective. So we still feel that is better option than going through the IBC process.
Got it. They've taken you on the same questions. I think speed, etc., is I think very important. And are there any specific examples that you would be more keen to look at? I know you mentioned generally a lot of stuff in special situations, but what exactly in terms of sectors and any opportunities in terms of example that you're looking at?
I think in terms of focus areas or sectors, we are sector agnostic. So if you look at what we have on hand today in our pipeline, I think we have everything from industrials to financial services, hospitality, logistics, a little bit of real estate. So I think we are pretty much sector agnostic, and we are seeing opportunities across sectors. In terms of stage, what you spoke about earlier, I think what similar to what Srini mentioned, even we are focused more on performing credits than on uh, actually companies which are already NPA and IBC. And one of the things which I always joke about is India is a country where neither equity nor debt wants to take a haircut. Right? Nobody wants to take a haircut. Only the incoming guy should take a haircut on day one. That is the expectation. So you end up doing performing credits where at least uh, you don't need to have an issue upfront. And I think a lot of our returns are coming from genuine business underwriting. We are taking equity participation on where we believe there is genuine value to the asset, or we believe the business has substantial turnaround potential, and we make returns of the performance of the business as against trying to take a deep haircut and try and make money, because the certainty of those transactions is really questionable. Even pre, post, ITC, in all situations, it just becomes very difficult to get stuff done. So you're better off trying to make that differential return through genuine participation.
And so I think just to you and Srini, a last question on this. Will you also be open to taking equity participations, or it's largely only debt in most cases, but equity only in the rarity if it really needs to be?
I can go first. So, like I said, we are doing. We are doing a whole bunch of structures, including pure debt, of course. But for a lot of transactions, we are taking downside protected returns and then taking participation in the upside through equity, because we think that sort of aligns interest and make sure we are all making returns of the performance of the business. But per se, across, if you see an opportunity set perspective, right now, on a risk adjusted basis, debt makes a lot more compelling investment opportunity than equity in India right now.
And Srini, your
Yeah,
take
from
on
our,
this?
yeah, our take is, I would second what Dave is saying. Traditionally, we have generally had a much higher bias towards doing debt transactions. However, what we are willing to do in the current environment is that as a proportion of what we were originally thinking as equity risk within the overall scheme of a financing plan that we put together, we are willing to take far greater equity risk, largely on account of the fact that a lot of equity values have actually got corrected, and in certain cases, the only way that we can make outsized return is that if we bet on the fact that the company will actually do well. So yes, so we are certainly open to taking more equity-ish bets which play out because the underlying company performs, and we are able to put together a plan which sort of results in unlocking value in the company. And one of the things that we always like to do is that whichever company that we are investing in, we hope to at least have a bridge to a certain target profitability for which the company may want to do 1, 2, 3, 4 items which are identified upfront. And one hopes that one is able to sort of execute on that. Now, whether that may be a debottlenecking, that may be expanding brownfield capacity, whatever it may be, but there is a plan, and if we execute on that plan, we should be able to capture the equity upside, and that's where we are certainly looking at opportunities.
And what kind of IRRs are you looking at, Srini and Dave? Because there used to be a joke at some point in time that if you expect about 12 to 14%, it's good return. If you got 18 to 20, it's great return. If you expected 24% plus, that means capital not coming back. So in the current situations, what are your IRR expectations internally and to the LPs, and what are they looking at? And in dollar and in rupee terms.
You want to go first, Dave?
Yeah, so I think what you said is absolutely true on the returns. I think all of us have had good times, but to consistently hit those kind of returns and at least early 20 returns is usually a recipe for disaster in India. Um, I think what's changed from a yield perspective is in India, funnily enough, yields actually haven't changed, right? If you see traded bonds, it's just that the bond market is so illiquid, yields are actually pretty much flat. But offshore bonds yields have moved up dramatically for India, as much as 8 to 10%. And even in the US market, where a lot of the capital is coming from, general US bonds are up by 3 to 4%. And at the end of the day, we are competing for capital with other parts of the world. And I think the financing or the yield expectation is definitely up by 3 to 4%. I think we are in the long run consistently trying to target 13 to 14% US dollar, which once you put the forex cost to it, comes to about 18 to 20% rupee. And I personally think it's very difficult to sustainably make that of debt. We are in a period of capital dislocation. So hopefully, if some of us get our strategies right for the next 2 years, we'll continue to make those returns. We are in a spot in the cycle where there's really huge appetite for credit. But over a 10, 15, 20-year period, it's really difficult to keep hitting those.
Srini?
Yeah. Our number is still in the early 20s. That's what we are shooting for as a combination of debt plus equity returns in rupee terms. Most of the funds that we raise, even though we raise it from global capital providers, is in rupee terms. And the difference is that I don't know about Brookfield, but we don't lever our funds. So these are unlevered returns from an investor point of view. So early 20s in rupee terms, so it could be a combination of debt plus equity. That's what we're shooting for.
Got it. Okay. So this is very interesting. Okay. So I think Abhinav, coming to you, I think there is clearly been I think interest that we are seeing from both from large offshore funds and credit and special situation funds in both substandard assets and standard assets, and I think you've done some of those deals. So one is, what is your perspective as an advisor that you are seeing, in the NPA market versus standard asset market, and can FPIs, really come, or how are foreign investors really participating in some of these opportunities?
Thanks. So I think on the first question, on the perspective that we are seeing in the market as advisors, I think I echo what Srini was saying, that at the end of the day, Dave was saying, sorry, that the liquidity in the market at the grassroots level is lesser. Even though RBI has been releasing funds, the concern that we are seeing more and more, especially with NBFCs, is that the liquidity is what they will be using the cash for rather than to on lend, which doesn't really serve RBI's purpose to make sure that there is money at the grassroots level or at the borrower level. And that's where I think the foreign funds, the special situation funds, will end up playing a more important role. I think, and I agree with what I think both Srini and Dave were saying, that the debt side with equity upside is something that we've also seen a lot more interest on. It's more on the debt side, but I think even on the debt side, due to a number of challenges that have come up in the past week or so, or rather number of updates or developments that have happened over the last week or so, we've seen some of the people taking even a further interest on the debt side. But primarily,
about the Franklin Templeton
that's
case.
right. That's right. So we can delve into that also. But I think I agree with what Srini and Deva are saying, that we're seeing more interest on the debt side, taking a slightly cautious approach with respect to equity investments. And that's what has been attracting more and more attention.
From a structure perspective, can you just guide on these structures for foreign investors?
So I think on the stress side, or assets which have become NPAs, at the end of the day, we have the IBC, which is a much larger game, which involves all stakeholders in a company. The other option that people have, which also has been seeing a lot of interest of late, is the ARC structure. Negotiated deals through the ARC structure, where a bulk of the money to buy the loans from the banks are funded by foreign special situation funds, with the ARC just taking the exposure that is required to take, which is 15%. We've also seen this strategy being used for debt aggregation on companies which are on the verge of going to IBC. For example, in SR Steel, we saw one of the ARCs come up and take up the loans from a number of different banks, to get into a situation where they could have a say in the COC. And this is something that we are seeing more and more. In this structure, primarily the ARC sets up a trust, acquires the loan from the bank, which is sitting in India in a cash for cash deal. 15% of the ARCs, SRs are taken by the ARC itself, with the balance 85% being funded by one or multiple special situation funds offshore. So this is something that we've seen a lot of recently, and from what we are seeing in the market, we expect this to increase substantially. Since the loan, as Srini was mentioning, are already NPAs, the discussion with the banks on valuation are much easier as opposed to situations when they are not NPAs as such. I think on the non-stress side or non-NPA side, what we've been seeing more of is securitization and direct assignment. Direct assignment, honestly, lesser than securitization because securitization has its own set of advantages. While it's a slightly more difficult process than anything else, a securitization is primarily an NBFC as an originator setting up a trust, issuing PTCs to FPIs offshore. So very similar to an ARC structure as such, but for non-NPA assets, you have minimum holding period requirements, which range from 3 months to 4.5 months, depending on the tenure of the loan and the frequency of payment. And you have minimum retention requirement such that the originator has skin in the game, which varies between 5 to 10%. We've seen this structure used a lot, and we've been doing a few of these on revolving facilities of sorts, especially for small retail lending. 1 to 5 years, etc., where these structures are set up, securitization trusts are incorporated, money comes in, and that money is again flushed into the system as a for generating new loans. So these are structures that we've seen a lot on the non-stress side for retail loans. On the non-retail loans, however, we've not seen that much action on the non-NPA assets. And I think a large part of it is due to the reason that I think Srini was mentioning on valuation. Unless it's a consortium lending where a bulk of the lenders have already classified the asset as NPA, we haven't seen a lot of banks or Indian lenders being open to discussions on valuation, haircuts, etc. But as the NPA situation arises, we've seen that changing. So this is primarily, which is what we've seen on the debt side for structures for investment by special situation funds globally.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Is there anything in the law that prohibits the non-performing loans also to be sold as a PTC?
So, Srini, the thing is that the RBI guidelines which talk about the PTC regulation, PTC formation, and the securitization, those are for standard assets. For NPAs, what they are looking at doing is primarily selling it off to ARCs. They haven't specifically permitted, PTC structures to be created for NPAs.
But they are not permitted also.
That's right. So, as you said, I mean, that's something that we can always work around. But RBI has in the past frowned upon it because a couple of ARCs were actually trying to do it outside the ARC structure, and the RBI took a call that took a very negative view on that, saying this is not something that we permitted specifically to anyone. So if you want to do these, please come and have a chat with us rather than doing it without checking with us.
Also, I think because ARCs have their own specific regime under the ARTs, and this is. But yeah, I mean, we can always pitch for it. Okay, so I think this is very interesting, and we see a lot of offshore credit funds, FPIs, etc. coming in by. In fact, one of the areas in which this used to be very popular was the historic 2.5% month kind of consumer loans, where some of these loans were bundled and sold by the NBFC or the fintech companies into a securitization trust where FPIs ultimately came, and without the restriction of the 3-year lock-in as a VRR would require for any kind of asset diversification sort of requirement. And I see that window sort of shaping up even better. I think coming to you, Nishchal, Uh, I think there are tremendous opportunities in the market today. But I think for some reason or the other, from a regulatory or tax challenge, the absorption is somewhere impeded. So, from your perspective, what do you think are the changes that are required from a regulatory and tax perspective to make this work better?
Sure. I think, I see a sea change in the lending world today compared to what was a decade or two back. The traditional sources or providers of capital like banks, HFCs, and NBFCs, they are struggling to generate capital for themselves or liquidity for themselves, right? And there are new sources of capital like foreign portfolio investor, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds that have come up in a huge way and can provide capital to some of the businesses that are going to get affected by COVID, right? Now, if you see, the government has been working on ease of doing business, ease of living, but I think the time has come for government to work on ease of bringing foreign capital to India, right? So if you see the latest, as of December 2019, there is $2.5 trillion available with global funds, which is ready to get invested in various parts of the world. Out of this $800 million is just for buyouts. And if you look at the debt funds, the GPs who are managing the debt funds today, they are managing at least 3 times more assets under management compared to what they were managing in 2008, 2009. So clearly, there is huge capital sitting outside India waiting to come into India. But our laws are designed for banks, HFCs, and NBFCs as providers of capital. These laws need to change to suit the requirement for new providers of capital, which are in welfare. Now, let me give you a hypothetical example. Let's say there is a foreign investor who is sitting on $1 billion worth of capital and wants to invest in a special set situation, right, in India. Let's say the entity which is in need of funds is an NBFC, right? Now, NBFC wants to sell its loans. So one situation is a good loan situation where NBFC wants to sell a good loan portfolio to the foreign investor. What are the things the foreign investor has to go through? First is it will have to set up a foreign portfolio investor entity, right? Second is there is a requirement to set up a securitization trust, right? Now that securitization trust, again, when it buys these loans from the NBFC, needs to ensure that all the securitization guidelines are met, including minimum tenure, minimum average maturity period. Then if the originator NBFC wants to have some stake, then junior PTC, senior PTC. So a lot of these things need to be taken care of before the foreign capital can come into India. Now, the requirement for this funding is going to be immediate in the next 3 to 6 months. The question is whether some of these new foreign players, for existing players like Brookfield, they will already have structures. But for new players who are looking at India and want to cash in on the opportunity, for them to set up this structure is going to take some time, and it might happen that some of the opportunities may not be there or may be grabbed by some of the existing players, right? So that's one point. The second point is, let's say if there is a bad loan which has to be bought, then as we discussed, ARC is the structure for buying the bad loan. So the foreign investor has to first find an ARC to partner with, figure out a structure to fund the ARC for the 15% which ARC has to fund if the ARC itself does not have money. We all know that the net worth of all the ARCs combined is not sufficient to meet with all the 15%. If you multiply, if you take 6 or 7 times of the net worth of some of these ARCs, it's not sufficient to meet with the stress that the Indian businesses are in. So that's another challenge. The other challenge is like for government is looking at not allowing IBC to get triggered for the next 6 months to 1 year. Similarly, maybe there is a requirement to do away with the 50% requirement for the FPIs, where every corporate bond issuance by an Indian borrower needs to have at least 2 FPIs with no FPI holding more than 50%. So why can't there be a relaxation for this requirement where you just allow one FPI to hold the entire corporate and issuance by the Indian borrower. The other point is on the flexibility for AIFs. Today, AIFs are allowed to only invest in securities, and we actually had a live situation where we were buying a loan portfolio from an HFC, and AIF had committed capital to buy that loan portfolio. But the problem that came up was AIFs can invest only in NCDs, and they cannot buy loans as per the current AIF regulations. So then a lot of questions started coming up on, okay, let me approach the borrower to change the loan into an NCD. Now the problem is at that time the borrower, one is you need his cooperation, and anyways on one hand some of the situation you may be wanting to call a default, on the other end you're asking for his cooperation to convert loan into NCD through board resolutions. Then you are also risking the fact that the borrower may come back and ask for a haircut, when you are negotiating some of these things for converting loan into NCDs. So clearly there are a lot of challenges even for the AIFs. Another important point which is there is, typically SEBI is not comfortable with a swap type of transaction in the AIF, which in similar situation the best way to acquire the portfolio, because AIF can acquire the portfolio and issue units to the seller. But based on our discussions with SEBI prefers a cash transaction as compared to a swap transaction for the portfolio. So that's also something, given the times we are in, SEBI should be looking at relaxing some of these requirements. As far as Indian monies are concerned, again, currently the PF authorities, insurance companies, mutual fund, again, one is they're not allowed to invest significant capital, and whatever they're allowed to invest, like AIF, they're allowed to invest only in NCDs. So there also there should be some requirement, relaxation for them to allow acquiring loans directly. FPIs, again, as I was mentioning in the first example, can be allowed to directly buy loans from the banks, or even securitization trust should be allowed to acquire bad loans. Why only through an ARC? So I think there are some of these changes that are needed to suit the requirements of new providers of capital, because we all know that the real money lies with the foreign investors, and unless we make life simple for them, things are going to be difficult for the Indian businesses going forward. So these were the changes that would be required from a foreign investors perspective, from a legal side. As far as tax is concerned, I think the standard ask is always to reduce the withholding tax rate on interest which is paid on the loans which are given by special set funds. So that's something which has been the request to reduce the withholding tax rate to 5%. And not have the cap of that benchmark rate, which is the SBI base rate plus 500 basis points, which is there under the income tax act. So broadly, I think these are the changes, Richard, which are required for the purpose of ensuring that foreign money comes faster to India for some of these things.
So Ruchir, can I just add to what Nischal said?
Please.
I totally second what he said on. From a foreign investor perspective, the route for doing some of these transactions is just so complicated for us right now, right? Like so when I'm trying to get a transaction done with a simple debenture structure with an upside, and there's nothing like particularly fancy about what we are doing. The amount of time we spend trying to figure out, oh, I have an FPI, but then I need a co-investor. Oh, I can do a VRR, but then I'm locked in for X amount of time. Oh, I have an AIF here, but then I need 3 deals of the same size, and if I don't like deals, I have a diversification norm issue. So the amount of time I should be spending trying to make sure my capital is safe and I get my transaction right, I spend double the time just figuring out how the money actually comes into the country. And that's really something we should look at as making money flow for foreign investors much easier, because for folks sitting in somewhere in New York or Toronto, it's actually mind-boggling the number of hoops you have to jump to get capital into the country.
So yeah. So in fact, we are also taking up some of this at policy level with the DEA and DPIIT and all. In fact, there was one, since everyone's citing some examples. There was one incident, which is there was a infrastructure company with which required a concession fee of close to some 9,000 crores to be paid. The initial amount was paid, and after paying the initial amount, COVID happened. Now the problem is that what do you do? Because the equity investor tend to back off. The government is not prepared to change the bid timelines or the financial closure timelines. You need some short-term financing. And the worst part is that there is no short-term financing available. Because if you come from a normal FPI route, there's a 50-50 diversification requirement. There's only one investor. You come from a VRR route, there is a 3-year lock-in. ECB, there is an all-in cost ceiling requirement, which doesn't make any sense in today's market. You guys are special situations where you're talking about a high teen kind of a dollar return, and then you're expecting any foreign investor under ECB to lend you at 5 or 6% in dollar terms. It's just not sustainable. So I think there has to be multiple policy level changes to be made other than what Nikhil said. And at least I think one thing we are also trying to pitch for is for our larger investors. At one point in time, there was a relationship manager that was promised. If you are putting in $500 million or more by DPIIT, let alone relationship manager, no one even bothers. And this whole brouhaha about foreign debt exceeding equity and the government being considerate. I mean, these checks and balances came at a time when the government was flooded with cash flows and everything. Today is not that time. And foreign debt inflows are also equally important as foreign equity inflows. And if you can have a ring fencing of foreign debt inflow, because you can take okay up to 500 billion or whatever, you cannot take more than that. Let people be comfortable with that. We are taking that up, at a policy level. I know Srini has also been very active on that front. But let me just quickly ask you a question, Srini, and I think there are a lot of questions that I'm seeing coming here in the Q&A section, a lot of them directed at you actually. So, but before that, let me ask you one question before I get back. From because one of the topic was also fundraising perspective, and I think an LP perspective is very important. We are seeing all kind of denominator effect and all of this, playing up. Secondaries happening at discount. What are you seeing? Because you also run a lot of managed account. Are the LPs asking you, because there is a perception somewhere that LPs have just told the GPs, made a call to them and said, look, do not send me drawdown notices. Are you seeing LPs back off, going slow in managed account, telling you don't come to me? What is the LP?
Well, that may be the case. I don't know, what kind of, there are LPs, there are LPs. Managed account typically tends to be for very, very large accounts. My clients are all sovereign wealth funds and, probably amongst the top 10 pension funds in the world. My conversations with them has been that each one of them, obviously we are keeping them informed about what's going on in India, lockdown and what's happening and so on and so forth. I think each one of them have said that this is a great opportunity. As you know that we raised the $1 billion fund almost a year ago, and we have invested only $60 million out of that. So my LPs have been saying that this is a blessing in disguise that you did not invest. And now you got all this dry powder, and we think that you can get some fantastic deals. So go out and put money to work, and they are also asking us for potential co-investment opportunities. So these are very deep-pocketed, very large sovereign and pension funds who have taken that long-term commitment call to India. It is quite possible that there may be some other LPs which may be smaller in size. Family offices are also LPs in funds, where you may have heard, some reluctance to receive a capital call. I can say, in case of these large managed accounts, we are not seeing any such feedback at all. In fact, I've been telling my people that I've been far more busy sitting at home in the last 6 weeks. We have already had 3 investment committee meetings and put out 3 term sheets out in the market. And we're trying to figure out how we can, get due diligence done without going to clients' offices.
Great. I think from an LP perspective, I think just one other question I had was that India was usually a very small recipient of global capital, and within the Asian region, it was always China dominating that. With all of this happening, Dave and maybe Srini, followed by you, Dave, are you seeing your global capital being routed more towards India after between the India versus China debate now, given the circumstances?
Uh, for us, I think, look, I don't think it's an either or situation for us. So we've got some large global funds. The opportunity on a risk-adjusted basis has to make sense compared to the opportunity we see in the rest of the world. Including we are active in Brazil, we are active in China, we are active in Australia, and all the geographies are essentially, competing for capital on a risk-adjusted basis. So I don't think it's an either or situation for us. As of now, I think our India portfolio is significantly larger than China, for sure. I mean, that's just a fact statement, basically. And I think in future, it's a matter of where opportunities are seen. But for now, I think for sure, I think our India base is really strong, and we continue to see a lot of opportunity given the dislocation of capital. I'm pretty confident India will see sustained capital inflows. And Bruce says also, who's our global CEO, identified India in a number of public statements as one of the key sort of focus areas or focus geographies for us going ahead.
Yeah,
Srini,
I
you're
think.
also seeing this?
Yeah, I don't think it's India versus China, and in any case, it's too early to call capital flow trends. But what could happen, and this is just my hunch and speculation, is that I think, given the fact that geopolitical relationship across the globe is going to be rewritten after this COVID, and capital flows, particularly from and out of China, etc., depends upon the kind of geopolitical relationship that the origin of the capital would have with China. For example, many of our very large investors in India are Canadian pension funds. And you know that today, Canada actually has put out a very specific advisory to their citizens from traveling to China on account of the Huawei situation where a Chinese citizen was, imprisoned in Canada. So, all of those things will have an impact. And I'm hoping that if we get our act together and the wish list that Nischal put out in terms of regulatory and tax reforms, if we are able to get our act together, we will be in a far better position to receive capital. But remember that capital will only go to those places where they feel that the risk return parity is right. And since the global markets everywhere have got really hammered, uh, anybody who has a capital has a choice of investing in the US or Europe or in India. So you have to make it easier, and of course the returns have to be attractive.
Great. So I'm going to take a few questions, and maybe Nishchal, you can also take a few questions as you see them coming. And
Ruchir, I'm not able to see questions somehow, so why don't you?
I will take it. I think one question, and I think this question is coming across in different forms and shapes. I think a question is, from an equity investment perspective, how do you project the cash flows for FY21? What discount do you factor in your minds, because you don't really know where is the bottom? So I think it's a valid question. You could discount only if you knew where does it end. So how are you doing your deals?
Well, I can tell you how we are thinking about it. I think, first of all, we assume that the coming quarter is going to be a washout. Secondly, we assume that it will take at least a couple of more quarters for normalcy to return. And this is obviously based on the fact that we are somewhat mean reversion happens. That's one part of it. At least in the kind of companies that we are looking to invest in, those companies have a performance track record in the past. So if it's a manufacturing company, for example, you know that if the company operates at 80-90% capacity utilization and the revenue per unit of product sold is so much, you can have this kind of a margin. So in that sense, it's not hard to sort of assume that at some point there will be a mean reversion. So for different industries, we will take different mean reversion assumptions. So for example, in tourism, hospitality, we may take a longer mean reversion. In some other cases, it may take a shorter mean reversion. At the end of the day, we are looking at some of these situations as where we continue to stay invested for more than 3 years. So one assumes that within about 3 years' time, there will be a reasonable level of rebound or normality in the market. That's the way one is thinking about pricing some of these things. Equity values, in any case, have got corrected. So many people who were asking for a certain multiple prior to COVID are willing to accept a much lower multiple, which also helps the cause. And finally, of course, our job to that extent is somewhat more easier because at least we know that businesses that we are looking at have a proven business model, as opposed to some of the early stage startup companies whose valuations I have no idea how they arrive at.
Just to add, Ruchir, to what Srini said, in fact, on the discount side, I think what is going to be important is, people, and especially this is what LPs are going to look going forward in the GPs, is must have industry experts who can actually predict the impact of COVID on valuations. And if you see 2008-9, when the financial crisis happened, I mean, before that, all the GPs were more or less generalist. And then after going through the global financial crisis, there was a need felt to have industry experts within the private equity funds. For sector-specific funds, anyways, there will be experts. But for line pool funds, which are investing in various sectors, there was a need felt, and it was good to have industry experts. But I think now we have entered the third phase where it's not just good to have, it's a must have to have industry experts who can understand the trend and the direction in which that company will move and factor that in the valuations. And another thing that's also going to change and which will also help in determining the discount rate to be applied will be a very robust and thorough due diligence. I think the standards of due diligence are going to change going forward compared to what they were earlier, because a robust due diligence will also help in identifying the areas where more discounting needs to be done to the valuations. So I think industry expertise and the broadening of the scope of due diligence will be the key going forward for determining the valuation.
Yeah, and I think just before that, I think someone asked a very interesting question. Will EBIT DAC, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, and corona losses, be the new formula? So will the EBIT DAC be the next one, wherein you may have to write back your corona losses? So, Srini, do you want to take a quick one? I think you already answered, but if you want to add anything on this.
No, I already answered that. Maybe they
You
can
already
take a
answered
shot.
that. Yeah, okay.
I think Ruchir, this formula works only for WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Doesn't work for investments.
Yeah.
In coronavirus
No, I
impact.
think look, from an investor perspective, you have to take a slightly more medium-term view. The reality is 6 to 9 months. Everybody recognizes is a washout, and I think if you are as a special situations investor getting into a company at this stage, you have to underwrite it very, very carefully in terms of what's the liquidity the business needs, what's the worst that can happen, how long can it sustain operations, and depending on the industry, whether it's capital goods, real estate, financials, like you really have to make sure you fill the hole. Because what you don't want is you fund something a month from now, and 4 months later it blows up, and people say like, "What were you thinking?" Right? Your LPs. So obviously you have to be careful, underwrite 6 to 9 months of stress, but also like we should have a medium-term perspective on this, that if you're backing steady business, right, over a 2, 3, 4 year period, like what's the, you're getting into businesses which are hopefully predictable and they will find their way out of this hole eventually. It's just that you have to be careful that you measure the size of the hole correctly.
Yeah. And I think for the audience, generally we have written a research paper. I think it's going to come out on EBIT DAC, adding back of. As lawyers, we've just given the legal perspective. How do you compute corona losses? Please come to us and and we will charge and tell you.
See, the only good news is that the one other metric that has completely gone out of the vocabulary is what I call as the P by I. Everybody was investing on EBITDA multiple, PE multiple. The P by I multiple has gone out of vocabulary. It is price by imagination, which is typically what most promoters are asking for.
Okay. I think the last thing, which I think there's a lot of questions, but we're running out of time. They have a last question, if I may ask. It's a tricky question to you. How are the investments that you guys have made, how would you say they are performing currently? Maybe you can take it up.
Yeah, so I think across sectors, obviously, when we invested, nobody saw what we are in the middle of. So Black Swan event. So obviously, businesses are going to be affected. For us, we are doing a lot of efforts in this lockdown on asset management. We are building in liquidity buffers in all our businesses, both on the debt side, so where there's local leverage, we are making sure we draw down leverage, even if we don't sit on cash, because we don't know what the next 3 to 4 months will look like. We are keeping equity buffers ready at an overseas level because we might have to pump in liquidity where we think there is an issue in the businesses. And you just got to make sure everything from HR, which is retaining high value people, to financing and liquidity buffers, to cash flow planning, to communication with your buyers, your investors, is all planned for the next 6 months because we are in unprecedented time. And as long as your businesses are fundamentally strong, coming out of this, right, irrespective of sectors, there will be a flight to quality. So as long as you made sure you got your planning right and you use the lockdown for the right asset management steps, we believe most of these investing companies will turn out okay.
Last question, just very quickly in a minute. A lot of people are asking this, that and this is for you, Dave, saying that, Dave, will you be open to will you be open to investing with existing banks continuing, or would you really want to be senior secured and the only lender in the project?
Usually we end up wanting to be the only lender, not because we can't work alongside banks, but and Ruchi knows because he does half of these document discussions for us. But it's difficult in India to do the right intercreditor arrangements, and it's very difficult to get banks, even if you're MES, to have practical arrangements where if things go wrong, how are both of you going to sit together and work out a solution? That whole workout approach is usually lacking with banks. So usually that ends up as an effort which you make to work alongside the existing bank, and you end by saying, you know what, like, I'm just going to take everybody out.
Short answer from my side, I won't do it.
You won't do it. Okay. Got it. Okay, great. Nishchal, anything you want to add?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, good. Then thank you so much. Thank you so much, Srini and Dev, for coming.
Thank you.
So can I thank everybody, Srini,
Yes.
Thank you.
Ruchir, Nishchal, Abhinav, everybody. I think it was a wonderful session, and I wanted to ask a lot of questions, but I thought the other wider audience deserves more. I can always ask you in private. But I'm just trying to think that how is the new pattern going to be, how the new cities will come up, whether there will be reverse migration, and what will be the impact. Because the technology, just as we are feeling more comfortable from home, people will be more comfortable from villages. And what about smart cities? Is this of some interest? Because I think those ones are going to be very interesting new value proposition that will be coming up. And just wanted to have some perspective, but looks like time is off. So,
but Nishit, you are a visionary. You have already done it. I think all of your staff can move into nice bungalows in Alibag and work from there. There's no need to come to Vikar anymore.
No, actually, on day one, on that note, let me tell you, we already announced that we are going to become a virtual law firm, and we created measurable standard for virtual. We said 80% virtual, 20% physical, because there'll be some need to interact and change from the house, So if we can reduce out of 100 cars, if 80 cars don't have to come to the office, we have done a lot, both for pollution, for traffic jam and stuff like that. And I think we are getting more comfortable and I can see you are more busy at home than in the office, right? So I think same thing would happen for other people as well, and whether the migration pattern would change. That's what is one of the questions we are examining. And if that changes, then what would happen? And number two, we are already working on smart city projects and new standards. You know, there is what is called Smart City 2000 watt cities, project. So those things are coming up, but not for today. We are going to have a special session.
With this, Nishit bhai, we may not need smart cities. We need smart villages. Because why create new infrastructure? You just
smart-
need to tech enable a village.
Correct. Smart people like you all, So these are my questions only to smart people because I'm not smart. And I don't want to take too much time, but there's so much to talk. And of course, we are going to have some interesting sessions ahead on smart cities and new generation things. 5G coming next week or week after next, we are taking 5G. So 5G combined with all the other kind of stuff, how it's going to change the profile in a big way. But it's not a time now. It's already close to 4 minutes above our limit. So my apologies, but thank you so much, each one of
Thank you.
Once again.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Srini. Thanks, Dev.